The tragic love letters Walt Whitman sent to his secret male partners. Walt Whitman is celebrated as the father of American poetry, the great democratic voice, the man who sang of the open road, the body electric, the vast, untamed promise of a nation. He is on postage stamps. He is in school curriculums. He is bronze statues in public parks. But his most passionate writing wasn't in Leaves of Grass. It was in the letters he never intended anyone to read, and the private notebooks where he tried, frantically, to edit his own heart out of the historical record. This is the story of what Walt Whitman wrote when he thought nobody was looking. On a cold, stormy night in early 1865, Walt Whitman boarded a horse car in Washington, D.C. He was 45 years old. He'd spent the war years volunteering in military hospitals, tending to wounded soldiers, writing letters home for boys too broken to hold a pen. He was exhausted and grey-bearded and alone. The car was empty except for the conductor, a 21-year-old Irish immigrant named Peter Doyle, an ex-Confederate soldier who'd recently been discharged. He was working the night shift, rattling through empty streets. Doyle later described the meeting to Whitman's biographer, Richard Morris Buck. He said Whitman looked like an old sea captain, sitting there with a blanket around his shoulders. I thought I would go over and talk to him. Something in me made me do it. We were familiar at once. I put my hand on his knee. We understood. From that time on, we were the biggest sort of friends. Whitman did not get off at his stop. He rode the car to the end of the line, rode it all the way back, and stayed with Doyle for the rest of the evening. For the next 8 years, they were inseparable. They rode streetcars together. They walked along the Potomac in the moonlight. They ate fruit at the Center Market. They sat together for a studio photograph, the first known photograph of Whitman with another person, posed, as one scholar later noted, in the conventions of a marriage portrait. And when they were apart, Whitman wrote to him, constantly, desperately, with a tenderness that makes the letters almost unbearable to read. Dear comrade, I think of you very often. My love for you is indestructible. Dear Pete, dear son, my darling boy, my young and loving brother. These are not the letters of a man describing friendship. They are love letters. And Whitman knew it, and it terrified him. In the summer of 1869, something happened between Whitman and Doyle. A conversation, a proposition, something Whitman found unspeakably shocking. He wrote to Pete about it afterwards. I was unspeakably shocked and repelled from you by that talk and proposition of yours. You know what? There by the fountain. We don't know what was said. We never will. But it shook Whitman to his core. And then, in a private notebook dated mid-1870, Whitman did something extraordinary. He wrote a furious entry addressed not to Pete by name, but to a code, 16.4. The 16th letter of the alphabet is P. The 4th is D. Peter Doyle, reduced to numbers, hidden in plain sight. The entry is anguished, written in capitals, as if he were screaming at himself on the page, to give up absolutely and for good from the present hour this feverish, fluctuating, useless, undignified pursuit of 16.4. Too long, much too long, persevered in, so humiliating. And then the edit. Throughout the entry, wherever Whitman had written him, he went back and scratched out the last 2 letters, replacing them with Him became her. He was rewriting the gender of his own desire in his own private diary. As if even alone, even in a notebook nobody would see, He couldn't bear to leave the truth on the page. The Library of Congress holds this notebook. The scratched out letters are still visible. You can see where his pen hesitated. Whitman didn't give up Peter Doyle. The resolution in the notebook lasted about as long as most resolutions do. They continued to see each other, to write, to share a life that existed in the gaps between what could be spoken and what could not. But then came Harry Stafford. In 1876, Whitman was 57, partially paralysed from a stroke, and living with his brother in Camden, New Jersey. He met an 18-year-old errand boy named Harry Stafford at a printing shop. The pattern repeated, the intensity, the possessiveness, the anguish. Whitman gave Stafford a ring. Stafford wrote to him about it. "You know, when you put it on, there was but one thing to part it from me, and that was death." But the relationship was volatile. Stafford returned the ring. Whitman gave it back. Stafford returned it again. The ring went back and forth between them like an argument neither could finish. Stafford wrote letters that hint at what was happening beneath the surface. "There is something wanting to complete our friendship." He wrote about wanting to make a man of myself. Language that scholars have interpreted as guilt, confusion, or the particular anguish of a young man trying to understand desires he had no framework for. Whitman, meanwhile, hid the Stafford relationship from Peter Doyle. He was managing two secret loves simultaneously, neither of which could be spoken of publicly. The father of American poetry was living a double life inside a double life. And then there was the question, the one Whitman spent 20 years trying not to answer. In 1871, a British scholar named John Addington Symonds read the Calamus poems in Leaves of Grass, the cluster of poems that celebrate the manly love of comrades, and recognized immediately what they were. He began writing to Whitman, carefully, persistently, asking the poet to confirm what the poems seemed to be saying. Symonds kept asking for nearly 2 decades. Finally, in 1890, he put it directly. "In your conception of comradeship, do you contemplate the possible intrusion of those semi-sexual emotions and actions which no doubt do occur between men?" Whitman's reply was panicked. He called the suggestion damnable. He said such a reading was entirely undreamed and unwrecked. And then, as if to close the door forever, he claimed to have fathered 6 illegitimate children. No evidence of these children has ever been found. Not one. Scholars have searched for over a century. The 6 children appear to have been invented on the spot. A desperate fabrication by a 71-year-old man who could write the most intimate poetry in the English language, but could not, even at the end of his life, say out loud what it meant. Whitman died on March 26, 1892 in Camden. After his death, Peter Doyle kept Whitman's old coat, a raglan overcoat, for the rest of his life. He told Bucky, "Now and then I put it on, lay down. Then he is with me again. I do not ever for a minute lose the old man. He is always nearby. In a crisis, I ask myself, what would Walt do? And whatever I decide Walt would do, that I do." Peter Doyle died in 1907, 15 years after Whitman. He was 63. He never married. The dark room behind Leaves of Grass is this. Walt Whitman wrote the most expansive, generous, democratic poetry in the English language. He sang of the body. He sang of the self. He sang of love in all its forms. And then, in his notebooks and his letters and his desperate reply to Symonds, he tried to erase the most honest thing he ever felt. He coded the name of the man he loved into numbers. He scratched him into her. He invented 6 children who never existed. He spent his life writing poems that said, "I contain multitudes," while frantically trying to make sure nobody understood which multitudes he meant. The letters survive, the notebook survives, the scratched out pronouns survive, and Peter Doyle's voice survives too, saying the thing Whitman could never quite say in print. We understood. Subscribe to the channel. We post videos weekly.